This is Joshua Badu, your pastoral performance coach, and you're listening to the 100x Dudes podcast, your weekly dose on how to 100x your life. Now, today, unfortunately, we are missing one of our co-hosts. Jeremiah Teo has had an emergency and can't be with us today. However,
Oh
I'm here to hold down the fort with a very special guest, Jordan Hedi. He is a bio-statistician.
no. Got it.
I got it. We were practicing for a good 5 minutes before we started doing this, and he works for New South Wales Health Department as well. Jordan, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. I'm super excited. Like we said earlier before we hopped on this is the first time I've ever been on a podcast. So for me, this is a brand new endeavor, brand new journey. So I hope we'll make it together. And I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, there's a first time for everything, and I think within like that 10-minute mark, you'll forget that I guess we're being filmed, or you're used to being filmed because you also do YouTube videos as well. You have a blog
That's
site,
right.
you have things that you're doing. So, are you used to being on camera now after doing all these other things?
I am used to being on camera, but it's normally just me deadpan straight looking at the camera, not having that back and forth kind of dialogue. And, I've gotten a little bit better because working from home, like I'm sure with a lot of people have kind of experienced this,
Yeah,
having to do all these group meetings, you kind of got
yeah.
to get used to the talking in between and not talking over one another and just figuring out the flow of like talking through a kind of medium like this with like Zoom.
Hmm.
But it's one of those things, the more you practice it, just like anything, the better you get. So, I mean, I think this is just going to be another great practice round.
Well, I think doing podcasts and talking to someone else over the internet is much easier than talking to just a camera deadpanning it. I found that when I was starting to create YouTube videos and I was just like looking straight into the camera, it was
Mhm.
such a foreign feeling to be trying to record seamlessly and not make any mistakes. I was like making so many blunders. My editing was like constant. So I find this much more natural and easy than trying to do deadpan towards a camera.
No, I totally get what you mean. Like when I initially started the first couple of videos, so something you might notice and your viewers might see as well is that my eyes sometimes kind of shake sometimes. So
Okay.
I have a unique, a very somewhat rare condition called nystagmus, which is a
Mm.
very fancy word for dancing eye syndrome. So
Okay.
when I get either nervous, stressed, or have really lack of sleep, it becomes really prominent and you can kind of see it really clearly. So
Ah.
when I was doing those first couple videos where I'd never done recordings before, never done any YouTube related stuff, and I was in that kind of very strange format where it's just you and you're just in a room like by yourself, four walls and a camera.
Yeah.
Uh, when I looked back on the footage, I'd never, and this is the funniest thing. It was like one of those things you learn about yourself is
Yeah.
I'd never really recorded myself on video before. So I've never seen what my nystagmus looked like. Like
Oh
24
yeah.
years into my life, I'd never seen what it looks like. So I'd have strangers come up to me and be like, "You okay?" Like, because they're thinking I'm on drugs or something because my eyes have got like just going all over the place, side to side. And I'm like, no, it's just this thing I have. But I've always wondered, and I was always curious about what it looks like
Yeah.
because when you focus in the mirror, and this is, I don't know if other people who have nystagmus have experienced this as well, when you look in the mirror and try to make it happen, like you try and force your eyes to do the shaking, it just doesn't want to do it. It's like your mind just consciously knows you're trying to catch it. So
Mm.
it just doesn't, the subconscious is like, no, you're not going to get me. And
Yeah.
so it doesn't pop off. But having the camera and not having that direct reflection, it did allow it to do the shaking. And I saw it for the first time and I was like, whoa, that is, yeah, I could see why some
Was
people
it?
thought that's
Yeah. I
weird.
imagine was that an eerie feeling? Like, what did it feel like you were looking at a whole new person? Like, what was that like?
It was kind of a relief because like it was one of those things like when you don't know, it's like that hidden thing you don't know, so you kind of stress about it or fear about it more because it's that unknown. But then
Mm.
once I saw it for what it was, I was like, oh, okay, look, I could see why someone would take that and go, oh, that's a little bit weird. But to me, I'm already so accustomed to knowing that's going on to then finally see it and go, see it for all its glory. I'm like, well, you know what? It's not actually that bad.
Yeah.
It's not that bad. So
Yeah.
I
Imagine.
haven't worried.
Yeah. Imagine that'd be a massive relief off your shoulders. I feel like um hopefully this is not too rude, but like I imagine like I would almost try to play it off as like I'm super analytical. Like if I'm either like darting back and forth, it's like I'm just analyzing everything in the room. I'm like 10 steps ahead of you kind of thing. Like,
yeah, and you do like the classic anime, like, you know, do the glasses, because I got them as well. You did the analyzing very well.
yeah, the moment glasses go to the forehead, you know that's like next level. That's a next level character. But that being said, no, I think that's a cool way just to break into today's episode. So I think there's two main avenues that I imagine us going in, and we may go on tangents and side roads, and that's part of the journey of, you know, what this crazy just conversation is. But one, I was very curious about the role, the implications, and, you know, being a statistician and how it applies in business, in government, in health, or just in whatever area it may be. I may be overshooting it, but I was curious to see how that plays out in your life and how that affects different industries. And then also, just in us getting to know each other, I now realize as well about how involved you are with self-development. And one of the first things you were saying was you entering into a point in your life where you're chasing those mini epiphanies. And I wanted just to let you keep going on with that. What was like that transition, and what did you mean by that exactly?
Okay, so to kind of explain what I was going on and with that whole kind of train of thought, you'd have to go back, God, this is going to test my memory, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
So I was at that point, I think, in the late second half of my second year at university, doing my bachelor's, doing a finance and stats degree. So it was like a double major kind of situation. And I was in a weird state in life. Like, the best way I could describe it, and I've described this like a number of times on my channel, I was in this like very pent up aggro, but also it wasn't like lashing out as in like punching walls and stuff like that, but it was more like I was angry at myself.
Yeah.
And what I've, looking back now through reflection, I've kind of acknowledged and realized was my expectations about life were way up here, but my effort was all the way down here. And that was a problem. And where that first mini epiphany kind of started was initially with watching Jordan Peterson videos online. So at the time, I can't remember the channel. God, I think he's called Archangel or some sort of
911.
Yes, yeah, that's the one. So
Yeah.
he would post these snippets of lectures that were done by Jordan Peterson, where he would talk about a certain concept, and the guy would cut it up into like a 10, 15-minute video and then post it online.
Yeah.
So I don't know how the YouTube algorithm, maybe it was all destined, meant to be. The algorithm spat one of those videos at me, and I was like, oh, you know, click on that, whatever. And so I did it, right?
Yeah.
And I watched it, and, you know, and I was like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. You know, once I'd finished it, I was like, oh yeah, that was not too bad. And so I'd go on to another one and to another one. And it wasn't like, it took me a while to realize that I was actually listening to self-development and self-improvement, like related content.
Yeah.
Because for the longest time, I was one of those people, and this is something I've noticed as I've gotten more involved in self-development, actually become a creator of self-development related materials, is when you talk about that kind of topic, like self-development, self-improvement, immediately 80% of your audience, or if you're talking to like the public or someone, 80% of your audience is already switched off. It's just not something on their radar. You're not talking about the hot new TV show or what celebrity said at like this to who. Like, you're not on that trending thing, you know, because some of this stuff,
I put it more towards education more than entertainment when it comes to self-development, as far as like
100%, completely agree there.
And like you said, like with people kind of switching off, is like just trying to get people to sit down to focus and to learn. Like even say with reading, like I'm not sure if you're familiar like with that saying, like leaders are readers, but the percentage of people who probably actually sit down to read is like so slim. I find even myself, like I try to force myself to read. I try to like read, you know, a couple of books a year just to get some kind of content into me. And you realize it's just that constant effort you need to put in to get there. Versus I'm gonna sit back, throw on some Netflix and chill, or I'm gonna throw on YouTube and just like binge a whole bunch of TV series or whatever.
Mm.
It's just two different levels of will, you know?
Oh, 100%. And the reason is because it requires you to think, and thinking is hard, but thinking is the thing that's going to bring you forward in life. And, you know, it's actually brilliant that you actually brought up reading, because that was also another mini epiphany I had. And I'll go back onto that previous little tangent later, but just sticking on the reading, it was something and this is something I told our mutual friend that I would never do. Like, I was like, I'm just not a reader, man. Like, if I want to learn something, I'll watch a documentary, which was a lie because I never did that. And eventually, I can't remember how it came to be, but someone suggested these two finance books. And like I said, I was doing the finance related degrees. And so I was like, oh, well, you know, if it's going to help me get a job, whatever, it's only 120 pages. How hard could it be? Right.
Yeah.
So I set up an initial routine where I'd read a chapter a day. And from that point on, I just got through that book, did a chapter a day, and then I moved on to the next one. And then before you know, I was on to the next one. And so I think that's something when it comes to reading, you constantly need to be doing is you can't just be thinking about the book you're reading now. You need to have planned the book you're going to read after you finish the one you're currently on, because you never really want to have that slipstream. And this goes to like things like exercise as well. And I kind of view it in that same mind, because it almost is like, you know, cerebral, like mental exercise. You know, it's like bumping weights, as like Arnie would say, but like it's all in your head. You know, you're not actually at the gym, but it's surprisingly more demanding.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think what's interesting to me, I find with reading, I guess staying on that topic, is even when it comes to reading, like I find that I'm trying to make sure that when I'm reading, I'm trying to read to retain the information that I'm analyzing. Like I have a few friends who they told me about how when they read stuff, I guess they speed read it, which is fine. You know, you hear about people like Jim Quick and how he talks about speed reading and how to retain information while reading it fast, and how, you know, if you're a CEO, they read like 50 books a year, so you have to be reading like one book a month kind of thing, or one book a week. And it's funny because when I talk to people who say aren't at that level of like supreme mental capacity, and they are trying to say maybe take on reading and whatnot, I find that at times they read it but they don't retain it. It's almost like they're doing it just to do it. Like it's like trying to tick off a list. Like when you were going through that period of like knocking off books, did you find that you were retaining the information you were taking on, or did you see yourself just kind of like onto the next and maybe not remembering what was happening in the past book?
I feel, look, when you're talking about a book, and this goes to that age-old debate about which one's better, the Harry Potter books or the movies. You know, if you had only watched the movies, you'd go, oh, the movies were great. But if you were the person who'd read the books, you'd look at the movies and go, yeah, they're all right, but they missed this, and this. And the reason for that is because when you're in a medium such as a movie, you've only got a certain amount of space. Like you've only got so much time and so many things you can cover. But with a book, you have so much more that you can do. And I do agree that like you should aim to try and retain as much as possible. But thinking that you're going to be able to, you know, hold every bit of gem, like every gem from that book, I think is a little bit of a fool's endeavor. I think a lot of it is, I mean, you should try to obviously try and get as much as possible. And the age-old teaching I've like kind of, or belief I've kind of heard around this is, if you're going to read something, and especially if it's non-fiction, try to teach it to someone. So once you've read, like, let's say you've read a chapter about someone, go to your friend, go to your parents, go to your family, and tell them, hey, this is what I learned, this relates to that, and that connects to this. Because for whatever reason, just verbalizing it, what you've learned, and also trying to, you know, bestow it onto someone else you want, like I said, you won't retain everything, but it will do margins way better.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what are you reading at the moment? What's going through your head at the moment?
Oh no! I walked myself into that trap, didn't I?
You walked right into it.
I'm going to preface this. I wish I had my wallet on me, but I am a card-carrying Labour member of the Australian Labour Party. But I am reading. I mean, look, I got to give it to him. He has a brilliant title, Lazarus Rising. God damn, that's a strong name. John Howard's. Yeah, Lazarus Rising. John Howard's autobiography.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. So I've been doing a series at the moment where I've been going through biographies of Australian prime ministers since Gough Whitlam. So done Gough, done Bob Hawke, done Keating, moved on to John Howard, and after that going to follow on to Rudd and then Gillard.
You already, to me, are in a rare class because I see us both being millennials. I'm just assuming, unless you're secretly 18 or secretly 50. I don't see that.
I get told I'm 12. I still get ID for alcohol. I'm like, God damn.
No, but when you put the glasses on, you do the anime.
Oh, true, yeah.
Then that gives you the extra, 10 to 15 years, so you're fine. But the moment you start to tap into the political realm, I know a lot of people in today's day and age, a lot of people are very political, but to sit down and actually read autobiographies of all these different prime ministers, I think that says a lot about, at least what I feel, I think it says a lot about where your mindset's at. I have a question for you because I found that I was very curious about just reading nonfiction, and I'll read a lot about people's topics. Just if it's a topic on, say, some science book, or it's a topic on leadership, or it's a topic on self-development, like I'd read those books. But just recently, I was actually started to read Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Stride Towards Freedom.
Okay.
And it was actually basically a memoirs of his civil rights movement back in 1956, back in Montgomery, when they were doing like the bus boycott, if you're familiar with that episode. And I never realized autobiographies give you a whole different outlook on learning that you can't get from just reading a subject.
Yeah.
And I don't know, have you also felt that? Like for me, it's one thing to know a subject. Yeah. It's another thing to know someone's life story. Because when you know someone's life story, I feel like you are automatically putting yourself in that person's shoe, and you're actually telling yourself, wow, this is what you didn't see on TV. This is what you didn't see in the news. This is what you didn't see when they were like outperforming. You're seeing behind the scenes, and you realize these people aren't perfect. They had their doubts. They had the setbacks. They had backstabbing. They had all these kind of things. And I feel like what I now appreciate about reading autobiographies is to see the behind the scenes of what it means to be successful. And I'm curious, since you're reading all these different prime ministers' autobiographies, like what have you begun to learn and receive from reading these types of books versus just books on topics and subjects?
So what I'd say about that, and like to go on from that, is when you said how like you can read a subject and you can know it and you can go, oh, well, this event happened and that was important because of it had these implications. But I think for me, and with reading these autobiographies and these biographies, is because you can know the policies and you can list them and why they're important. So for instance, something like Medicare, you can know why that's an influential and a real landmark policy. But what this offers is the insight into the vision behind it. Because before that policy was manifest and was a thing, someone had to have a belief in, this is how I would like to see the social safety net of this country go towards. And so you can see that with their thoughts and musings, and also, like you said, especially in the political arena, the backstabbing or swaying political will and confidence in, pursuing such, endeavors. You get much more of a feel of it, because you see it was more of a fight. It was something they had to stake themselves, their very existence on, to bring into being. And to see the effects of those landmark policies that were, decided upon decades ago, and you get to see how great things have turned out for something like Australia, for a country like ours. It's like, it gives you renewed respect for the actions they took at the time, because, and this is my personal opinion about our current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, I can't name a single landmark policy that man has come up for. I don't see any vision. But with some of these previous prime ministers, you see that they were aiming for something beyond what's happening just right now. They're seeing what could potentially be, and how do we get to those steps to get to that place?
Yes. So now I hear you. So you're saying in reading like these autobiographies or these biographies of these people, you're seeing like the the 10, the 15 year, the 20 year of how they actually, what they wanted and how they went about to achieve it, versus maybe like when you're just reading a subject or something, you're not fully grasping the timeline or the journey of what brought about a certain result. With you now reading John Howard, I remember when John Howard was prime minister. To me, it's kind of funny. I feel like no matter who is prime minister, they seem just to catch so much crap. Like it feels like everyone's just always piling on them. And then once they finally get out, then it's like, oh, you're kind of all right. You're kind of okay. You're not too bad, I guess. But when you're in that moment, it feels like it's just such mayhem. What was the biggest misconception or change of perspective you now have on John Howard since diving into that book?
Just to answer that first part about where you're like, you feel like they get a lot of flack, and then after the fact, they kind of get a little bit of an easy pass. I think that's mainly due to the media's need for a story. And most important, they need, they're competing with, all sorts of different other forms of media. So they need something, so they need drama. They need something exciting to pull in the thing, like to pull in the viewers. And there's this old adage in like the kind of journalistic circles, if it bleeds, it leads. So if there's a controversy or something, kind of that you could really spin it in a negative light, that's something you want to run, because that's going to draw attention and people want to know about that. But to go on to what you were saying about John Howard and what's been my biggest switch up, it's conflict. The interesting thing is I'm about 3/4 through, and some things it's confirmed in my mind about what I thought about him, and others it's slightly shifted, like some ideas of what he was going for. And I think the shift came when it came to the East Timor. So John Howard and his government at the time took a lot of steps to bring about East Timor's, independence, and kind of, because there was this weird situation where East Timor was somewhat kind of owned by Indonesia, but it was in this weird state where they were like almost like a special economic zone, but they weren't fully part of Indonesia. And there was like this weird, two-state solution to it all. But in the end, and this has been going on, and that had been going on for decades. And don't get me wrong, there had been many atrocities committed throughout this kind of weird policy, and like, will it not be? Will it be a kind of state of its own? But John Howard, through various means, kind of prompted and facilitated the eventual referendum, which was, so he sent in, him and Australia led the peacekeeping mission in East Timor so that a referendum could be held, so that the people of the East Timorese people could have a say as to whether they wanted to be part of Indonesia and stay kind of in the current state, or if they wanted to become their own sovereign nation. And, obviously there was other contributors from other countries, peacekeeping forces, but in the end, it ended up being with a referendum that came through in the positive. Yeah. And we were actually very instrumental in facilitating that and making sure that any, damage or, rioting or any kind of, backlash was kept to a minimum, there was always going to be some, there always is in kind of hectic situations like that. But they did, I feel, fulfill some of the international responsibility and regional responsibilities of our nation. Yeah,
fair enough. That's, to me, it's interesting, like hearing what you've said and obviously diving into like, reading these books. Would you say, are you well up to date with politics? Are you into it a lot? Are you very curious about what's going on?
I'd say, look, I wouldn't want to say that I'm like the most finger on the trigger political person, but I am very much interested in it. I do like to follow where things are at, and I am politically involved with the Labour Party. So just recently with the local elections, I was helping to campaign in the Hills district for Labour. And look, the Hills district is, and God, we're getting to local politics. Jeez, where did we go from here?
Hey, you never know where the journey's going to go. But I'm very curious about it though, because it's not every day that you hear someone, say I'm a a Labour card carrying member as well. Like, you know,
That's
so
it. That's it. But
yeah,
was helping to campaign there. The Hills is a bit of a kind of liberal stronghold. Very little chance of us ever really flipping it. But the thing is, you need to be present, because if you're not present, you know, then the opposition doesn't have any, nothing to worry
competition.
about. So they just get
Yeah.
a free pass. So it was a great campaign, good candidates. We managed to get a few people onto a few of our candidates onto the local council, and I think that was my first ever experience doing something like that, and I really enjoyed it, doing the whole pre-polling, even a fair amount of letterboxing, and it was felt good to be engaged. You know what I mean? Even if it didn't turn out to be the way we exactly wanted, being there was important.
Yeah. Now, I promise I won't stay on this for too long, because I feel like there obviously are other things as well that we can discuss. But when did you? Was there a time? Do you remember when you first started to feel yourself become more, I guess, politically inclined to know more about these things and to start reading these different men's autobiographies and what they had gone through? I know for myself, before I even let you answer, like just recently, thank God for YouTube. Like I jumped on like the Yale YouTube channel and started like binging all their lectures on like politics. Because the way I see it, I feel like politics is like, in a way, it has the elements of business, but just on like a national, global scale of all the different departments and ministries and demographics and people you need to be trying to keep, I guess, happy and
Everything running.
appeased. And it's like whether it's the parliament, Congress, the executives, like everyone needs to like keep it running, and you're leading all these people. And for me, doing business, I'm like, whatever can help me learn more about business and how to be a better leader, I'm curious about. And I feel like, to me, politics is like the ultimate level of leadership, because you're running nations. Was there a time for yourself when you started to feel yourself become more interested in this kind of, in these areas?
God, I think it has to be a bit of, I don't know. It's hard to, I can't like lock down at this day at 4:59. This was the moment I knew I was interested in politics.
Yeah.
I can't do that, but I'd say over the past 2 years, I've had a lot of influences in that arena, like pushing me to get more involved in that arena, because I was always originally someone who kind of fell into that trap of both parties are just as bad as each other. They're both shit. And I kind
a lot of people feel that way, yeah.
100%, because it's a really good thing to have.
It's
really
taken me a while
franchise
to have faith in, like, even now, like democracy and the ability for the people to choose who they want to be in charge is a beautiful thing. But you just realize that there's no perfect system.
Oh,
whether you have a
100%,
system of like dictatorships and communism, whether you have a system of democracy, like no matter what, you can find situations where it's going to be stalemates, it's going to be disruption, it's going to be corruption. And, there are those times where I'll say to myself, like, man, can we ever find a effective system that will really get us to, I guess, the promised land? And I guess, obviously, Australia and America and Western civilization, and we've made a massive improvement. So I don't want to be too dramatic, but I do at times have that feeling of like, man, can we ever really move forward when you never know, from decade to decade, the population becomes so polarized where anything now can become contentious and become just, so politically charged. But it sounds like you've been able to have more faith in that system. So yeah, I admire how you've been able to, I guess, evolve in that.
Well, I think like with a lot of things, it's the lens through which you look through it. You know what I mean? And the lens I look at politics with is the lens of somewhat self-development. I view it, okay, go to something like a previous policy I talked about, like something like superannuation or Medicare, right? Incredible bits of policy that have shaped the decades since their implementation, and will for pretty much the end of time, or until things dramatically change. And what they can accomplish, things like that, is they can take people, because something like superannuation, a lot of people, the reason why it was implemented was because a lot of people finished their work, they retired, they lived on however like much money they had, in cash or in a bank account, and then maybe that lasted for 5, 10, 15 years. And then once that was all spent, they had nothing, and then they were pretty much borderline living destitute. So what Paul Keating and Bob Hawke kind of implemented was, let's put in a system where, yes, the employers make contributions to this kind of retirement fund that they'll have, which, because of people are living longer, because at the time that's what they were looking at. They were looking to the future and going, hey, people are living longer. The longer they live, the less money they're going to have each year to spend. We need a system where people aren't going to be either going onto the pension because they can't afford to, or just living in their car, out on the street. So they went, this is something we need to do for the collective good. This isn't just good for, the party or, for the issues of the day. This is something looking forward to the future. How do we shift things at a very macro level to have a substantially positive effect over the long run for the entire population? And so linking that back up to self-development is when we were talking about what the 100X Dudes podcast is about, is trying to bring good things towards 100 people. You can view a policy like that through that lens, where it's like, okay, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to benefit people's lives in the long run and as broadly as possible. And that's, in my mind, something noble. And that's why I still retain that somewhat faith in the system.
I see what you're saying. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you, Jordan?
25.
How many of people our age, I'm 27, 2 years your senior, and such a corny joke. And I feel like a lot of people our own age is like, if you had to choose between a night out or sitting down and studying and really learning what passes policies in our nation and what moves the needle, whether nationally or globally or just in your state or in your city, a lot of people will choose that entertainment. When you think about that, what do you think it would actually take to see our own generation get to a point where we would choose education over entertainment? We would choose long-term and self-development over, immediate gratification and a great night out.
Look, this is a bit of a bittersweet thing. In some respects, I think it's things like this, having like avenues and arenas like this where things can be discussed and talked about in a manner where people can be engaged, because obviously with the internet and stuff like that, there are so many different, distractions or things you can get caught up in that, it's a problem. But at least on the internet, it's a permanent thing that's there forever. And when people stumble across it, just like with me, when I said I stumbled across the Jordan Peterson videos, it's that forever little, what's that, like breadcrumb, that breadcrumb that leads them on hopefully to the path there. So I think that's part of the solution. But to think that you'll ever get 99% of 20 to 30-year-olds actively interested in in politics and researching the issues and the space is I think that's a bit of a pipe dream. You've got to hope for as many as you can. You got to hope that you can get anyone, and even if you get one, that's huge. You know what I mean? Even if you can convince one person or to look a little bit deeper and to look into these things and go, what were the reasons behind these policies? What policies have been shaping things? And also, what are the dynamics currently? Because you can look at the history, you can look at how it reflects or, informs the present. And then you can look to where that's directing the future. You can talk about those things and provide an avenue and a resource for people to view. And hopefully you get one person to think about it. If you get none, you can't be too mad about it. That's just how it is. But you can't get them all.
What I love about Jordan Peterson and what he's been able to do is, I feel like if he has been able to effectively get people interested in education through the landscape of what their life can look like in the future.
100%.
And to me, it has an element of motivation, self-development, psychology, teaching. It's a lot of things wrapped up in one in a way that's unique and quirky for how he presents it as well.
If I could put it in one word, I'd say it's, and maybe you might not agree with this, but I think it is purpose.
I agree. Yeah, I can't disagree with that. It's purpose.
Yeah.
That's such a great way to say it. And there was a moment in my life where I took a step back and realized I was like, you look back 100 years, 1,000 years, and everything that we have today was because someone before us took a step forward, and then the person after that person built upon what that person had done. And it made me realize, I was like, oh, we have something to contribute that no other generation has ever done before, because we have the blessings of the past with the time of youth and, you know, resources to walk into the future. And when I started to look at life in that way of like, okay, I have a role to push humanity forward into a new age, into a new element, into new blessings, that provided me the purpose. And to me, I feel like what Jordan Peterson has been able to really successfully do is to help people see that they do have purpose and to go for that. And I honestly believe if we can also get our generation to see purpose in our contribution to policies, in politics, in the political arena, or in education, they will realize
In
like,
their
oh, this is
working
what I'm...
lives, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just said, oh, sorry, cutting in, but like just even purpose in their working lives and just how, like, in what they're doing day to day and in their daily interactions with others, you know what I mean? Not just even on just the grand scale and super, you know, flashy things of things like politics and, you know, and policy and stuff like that, but also just when it comes to the minute day-to-day things,
The
seeing
micro,
purpose in
yeah.
that.
In all things, from all stages, at all different levels of what it means to be human, right? So with yourself, so you let me know that you started off doing blogs. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
What were your first initial blogs like when you look back? Like, I know with myself, when I look back at some of my old posts, there was heart, there was passion.
That was hard. Got plenty of that.
You realize some things you said before you don't really agree with now. And you feel like maybe I'm more efficient now and all these kind of things. When you look at how you first started off, what was those early days for you like diving into the self-development space?
To be honest, it wasn't even meant to be self-development. So I also, oh God, man, all the skeletons are coming out of the closet today. I also write yeah, I know. I write short stories, and so I release them monthly. I've been a little bit bad in the past month. I've kind of forgotten about it. I've written them, just haven't posted them. And I'm sure my 3 friends out on the internet are very much angry in a Reddit post somewhere. But so it meant to be more about writing. It was meant to be a writing blog. But as you can imagine, when you kind of put self-development into so many aspects of your life, it ends up just seeping into other things that you didn't even intend. And so my first 2 posts are kind of about writing stuff, like writing related things, like, oh, you know, 3 thoughts writers should entertain and stuff like that. Cause I was going through that journey as well. But then like week 3, it was like, oh, and you know, you like writing, but you should also like reading. And it's like, let's get into self-development town. And like, you know, put on my cheesiest smile. And it was like, here's 5 books you need to read right now.
That sounds like it's kind of like 0 to 100. You started off like, you know, what writers need to know. Next thing you know is like, these are the 5 books you need to have a successful life. Like you really made that jump. And are you still blogging to this point now? Are you still active in this?
Still to this day. So the schedule I do, and like I will eventually chalk it up to something more, but I'm just working a manageable bit by bit kind of nature. So I do a written post release on Friday and then a video release on Saturday. So you kind of get that back to back on, you know, those 2 days. And then there's that kind of gap in between. But what I've noticed is, you know, so many people, like I'll post something and then there'll be like 4 or 5 people may see it on the day. But then for the rest of the week, people are going over things that I posted, you know, 3 months ago, like, and you know, all these other stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm just like, okay, the people will get to it eventually. So it's not like I have these people that their finger on the trigger, like for every post. where the second it comes up in their notification, like little bell that they're on it. But yeah, I'm so grateful actually for what this has turned into, because I was pretty realistic when I shifted into that more self-development space. I was like, look, if I can get one person, like with that same mindset, if I can get one person to read this, mission accomplished. You know what I mean? It's like we've made a difference.
Yeah.
But then to see how it's gone over the months, and it's progressed at some points in many months in double-digit numbers, I'm like, damn, it's still early days. But I'm so grateful for the people that do rock up to my website and have a read and send a like and say thanks, this is really good. And or sometimes they might post questions themselves. They might want, hey, I've got this this problem I'm having, like what do you think, what and I'll try and work in a post about that maybe a week or two down the line. But for me, it's just been a real miraculous journey, and I'm sure you probably have a similar experience with kind of doing these kind of podcasts. It's just like you never really anticipated it to be what it became, but it did.
Yeah, well, I think for myself with this, there are a few things that I've been learning along my journey that it kind of goes deeper than just the podcast, which was I didn't fully understand how great I could be without even being great on paper. I know that sounds confusing. Let me kind of
No, I know what you mean. I know. I want to take a guess at what you mean.
Go for it.
So, because this is something I've dealt with and also tried to post as well. I know it's been something that it's a curious thing. I think I know what it is. So we see the modern world, and you see all the Instagram photos of flashy cars, private jets, and people living the life and stuff like that. But when you kind of get through a really developed, once you get so far in a self-development journey and you do that self-reflection, you realize at a certain point, all of those things aren't going to bring you happiness. They might be objects of, that might entertain you for a little while, but then once you kind of had them and used them, you become numb to them in that kind of initial, that excitement becomes numb and it goes away. And then you're just left with a thing. But when you have that ability, which I think you've probably stumbled upon yourself, to be content with what you have and also where you are and where you're going, all of those superfluous, usually status-based, ego-based objects of desire just lose their significance a lot more.
Yeah, so you're on the money, you hit 70%, and then there's this last 30%.
Oh, I want to hear it.
Well, I don't want to put up too high and then I'm under deliver. But so like what you said, you say you have the material success, then let's say you have character success. Let's call that internal success. So material is external, that's on paper.
Yeah.
And then character is the internal, that's in your spirit. I realize what I'm most proud of and what's more beautiful than anything else is that interior character. It's more beautiful, and I'm more proud of that than any of the money, than any of the external validation or any of that, because I realize if you have a heart that is resilient, if you have a heart that is generous, if you have a heart that is disciplined in what it's doing, you can achieve anything. And all those external things are actually just manifestations of you having that particular heart in the first place. So if I could have all the external success, but internally I was not where I should be, I was a low standard, to me that's still failure. All the money, the women, the cars, all that stuff without the internal, to me it's still failure. But if you had none of this external success, but you had the internal tangibles, to me, that's complete success. Even if you're not successful on paper. And obviously you want both. Let's not get too high and mighty. You do want, it's cool to have both. But to me, I'm just most proud to think to myself that I can go through hardships and keep going. I
Yeah.
can do something for the love of it rather than doing it for validation.
Yeah.
I have the ability to critically think out an issue and figure out a solution. Because to me, that's something that life will always require.
Yeah.
And I think it overlaps with what you already said, which is why it's like you hit 70% of it, because like, it's not, this isn't as important, so like you're right, but also like I'm just more proud of that internal part of me now.
Yeah.
And it's just so beautiful that self-development's what's taught me that. I didn't feel that way about internal until I started my self-development journey.
And you know what? That was what we were talking about before. Like that's one of those mini epiphanies that can change your life. And to follow on, I think a perfect quote that I think somewhat captures what you were just talking about and what we were just going back and forth with. It was by this Roman philosopher. He said, "A thief can never rob you of your will." So they can take the cars, they can sully your name, they can take all the wealth, the women, the status, the power, but they can never rob what's inside of you. That drive, that what is you can never be taken away.
Yeah, that internal wealth is like just another funny way I like to call it. I think that will, how do I say it? If you have that, you will inevitably become successful.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. And I think like forward onto that and a complete another agreement with that and another quote, because by the way, if I love quotes because I think they capture, the way they can capture a whole concept is just so choice.
Yeah.
But a perfect one, I think, for what you were just saying then is private victories precede public victories. So winning internally when it comes to your internal character will, like you said, it's uncanny the number of times it inevitably works out that you also become a big, success, in business or in society or, when it comes to wealth or standing or role, you know what I mean?
That's exactly it. And I think it's just, it's been that cool journey. And has led me through so many different avenues, and it gives you a faith, like in the Bible, it says hope deferred makes the heart sick, which is basically meaning disappointment like destroys your soul. Like if you're always disappointed, if you're always seeing something and then having it ripped away from you, that's going to break your spirit. But I think when you go through enough shit, when you go through enough trials, you get to a point, like I always tell people, it's like, you don't realize you care less about what people think the more you step out.
Yeah.
When I first started trying to put out content, I was like, man, what if I bomb? What if I don't get what I want out of it? Now it's like, if it bombs, who cares? If it
who cares?
Sponsors, who cares? Like, it's just a different thing. And it's like, there's so much peace and freedom in that. You don't realize how much freedom there is in stepping out of your comfort zone rather than staying in that, that box of where you used to be.
What's that thing? It's like, because if you cared, right? So what it gets you desensitized to is valuing other people's opinions about yourself more than your own opinion about yourself. Now, don't get me wrong. You still need to be grounded. You can't be like, I'm the greatest of the world. No one can tell me otherwise. Like, no, you still need to have that ability to kind of, and I think that's where you need to, God, I can't believe we're going into gratitude. You need to like be grateful for the things you have and also who you are, to kind of be that grounding force where you can go, you know what? I'm not going to let someone who has their own internal demons and self-hating, psyche, I'm not going to have them come and tell me, well, this was shit and you're bad and you should give up, because this is horrible. This just is not it. Like, no, like, sorry. I'm going to persevere. Thanks. And so you can just discount something like that. And I think that's a skill where it's really important. And it's something that takes time, and it just takes enough interactions where the people that you can discount their opinion and voice, and then others that you take the time to listen to and go, oh, okay, yeah. I see what you're saying.
Choosing your constructive feedback wisely, I guess, making sure it's not just you're not throwing it to the wrong people who are just going to be clowns and trolls about it. What's the latest epiphany you've had? What's the latest
epiphany? God.
Do you
I
know
say
some
for
people are like? I'm gonna let you answer. They're like, some people are gym junkies.
yeah,
I'm an epiphany junkie. I can't.
yeah,
I can't get enough
100%.
of. Oh, I never saw it that way before. Oh, that's how I can do it. Like that to me is like gives me the thrill of someone jumping off a bridge and feeling like, woo! Like that's I'm on the other side saying I want to just see the world in a new way. What's the latest thing you've seen in a
Man,
new way?
I'd say, look, this isn't one of the. There's three I could use. That's the problem.
Okay. Well, go all three if you want to. I don't mind. We can.
Okay, controversial thing alert. So the first one is I was doing some reading, and people can look it up. So, God, I'm gonna blank on his name. Isn't this embarrassing? Um, Essentially, the Rwandan genocide, which happened late in the 20th century
Yeah.
between the Houthis and the Tutsis.
Yeah.
So there was all this reporting at the time about how horrible it was, and that there was all this like hundreds of thousands of people were being like massacred and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and that it was a international emergency. Things needed to be like responded. Sorry, I have my dog. Sorry, my dog is distracting me at the moment.
That's completely fine. While you're saying, I'm trying to like Google the Rwanda genocide to see if I can find the person's name you're thinking of. I'm like my own Jamie right now.
I'm just saying, Jamie, look it up.
I am Jamie. I'm everyone's assistant. I'm the host and the assistant.
I'm assistant to myself.
Are you referring to the guy who was the main character in the Rwanda, the guy who?
No, not Paul Kagame. No, not him. God damn, it's the old American political scientist dude. I can't believe I'm blanking on it.
Old American political scientist. That might be everyone.
Yeah, I know. God, isn't this embarrassing? And like after we're done with this, like an hour from now, I'll be like, damn, it was him.
That's fine. I'll do like a little clip at the end of this, but like, by the way, the person Jordan meant during the podcast was XYZ.
And the worst part was he didn't even write the book. It was his best mate. And he was writing pretty much saying, and he's a really prominent figure. I can't believe I'm forgetting.
But it's all right. Yeah, keep going with it though.
He pretty much looked at the details. And so there was all these reportings and findings that, X number of people died from this ethnic group. But then when you look at the censuses that happened early, and this is what the book is about, it examines that, how many people were alive and, okay, what were the reported deaths? The deaths were way outstripped the number of people that lived there. And I mean, I know you could say, oh, well, maybe there was some errors in the reporting of the censuses and the total number of people that were alive, but it was by a magnitude that it was just like no matter of little bit of error could have like been a problem, like been the cause of that. It was a little bit more of overblown by the media and stuff like that, to a point where it was a little bit like ridiculous, and it brings into question the whole idea of whether it was a genocide and for what purposes.
So I think it's estimating it was around like the 1 million mark for all victims. So you're saying that in this book it's saying that the population is much less than what the estimated deaths were.
Yeah, so pretty much there was two major ethnic factions. There were the Tutsis and the Hutus, if I remember correctly. Now, the Tutsis were the minority group, but they actually held the majority power. Because when the original European like colonizing force, God, I can't remember. I have to reread some certain section of the books to remember. But essentially, once they pulled out, they left the Tutsis in charge, and the minority group in charge. They gave all the power to them, and they kind of ran things. Yeah. And when it comes to the Rwandan genocide, it said that like a ridiculous number of Tutsis were killed, but when in actuality, it's like there wasn't even any of that there wasn't enough of a population for those figures to be correct. Yeah. So going into the overall like total deaths, different story. But when it was talking about the specific ethnic group that was supposedly targeted, it seemed like based off the evidence he was compiling, it seemed like the figures were out of alignment.
Interesting. Yeah, I think these are those things like when you look back in retrospect and maybe with more information comes out, obviously, people will challenge and say, okay, what's the truth around all this? But like when you look back in retrospect, you realize there's many things in history that were falsely reported or, misaligned in how accurate it was. We are actually hitting a point now where I didn't realize how much time we've been passing through, that I was going to need to be heading off soon. But what I want to do
what's
is,
the time?
I know it's almost already 8 now.
Wow.
What I want to do is, real quick, before I have you plug yourself, because I want you to plug yourself for the people. But what are those last 2 epiphanies that you've had, if you had to do like a lightning round?
Okay, number 1, John Howard did do some good things. One was, yeah, I know. So one incredible bit of policy that he actually did get through, and I actually think good on him for that. You actually did the right thing, was the Water Act of 2007. So that was brought through, if I remember correctly, it was spearheaded by him and Malcolm Turnbull, who later became a prime minister as well. And what was so important about that legislation was that it said that when it came to the major water system within Australia, which is the Murray-Darling Basin, there needed to be a plan and essentially a figure needed to be boiled down to, which was called the, I think, environmentally sustainable level of take. So what that means is the amount of water you're ripping out of the water system. So they needed to crunch a number as to what that needed to be. But the key thing is, you could not make considerations based on economic or social considerations. It solely was environmental. So in a lot of the discussion about climate change and stuff like that, it's always based on like, oh no, but how are we going to relocate these people? What's the social costs going to be? This was solely on what does the realities of the environment and the damage that's been done to it demand? And let's figure that out. So that's number 2.
I have like, I feel like if we weren't out of time, I would want to dive into that, because I think the idea of what takes priority, the environment versus the social versus the economical, we're having the same debate in regards to lockdowns, right? What's more important, the psychological, the economy, the health scare? And yeah, I think it's interesting to see how the challenges on how people have to decide what takes precedent and what will be the consequence if you don't get that decision right as well.
100%.
I feel like next time, I feel like this won't be our last meeting as well. I'd love to actually have you on again. It's actually been such a fun time.
I'd love to be back.
Yeah, dude, you have to come back, 100%. But what's the third and final one before we begin to wrap things up?
Okay. So third one is, Julius Caesar was not a tyrant.
Hot take.
Yeah, actually, we're doing all the hot takes.
I'm not that familiar with Julius Caesar's story. I started watching a show on Netflix. Who knows how dramatized and like accurate it is, but it's called like Roman Empire, and season 2 is about Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
And I watched like maybe 1 episode, so I don't know who he is just yet, but you're telling me he's not a tyrant.
Yeah. So just to be a quick rundown. So a lot of the flack Julius Caesar gets is essentially from one guy, Seneca, who, to put him lightly, was pretty much the PR poster boy, public relations wise, for the oligarchs who were in power in Rome at the time. And so Julius Caesar was doing some things that they weren't very fond of. Like he was forcing certain, like when it came to plantations and certain these like plantations that these oligarchs owned, he said there was a huge problem with unemployment. So what he said was, no, you have to employ a certain ratio. And I mean, God, isn't this so telling in the times? You have to employ a certain ratio of Roman citizens to slaves. You can't just have it all run by slaves. We need people to be working jobs. You have to employ a certain ratio. And so they weren't happy about that, because that meant they had to start paying people, because instead of just owning the slaves. And there was another bunch of other things where he did land reform, because people were in these overcrowded tenants where things were just burning down, because you'd have 40 people in, like one kind of small set of rooms, and it was like 30 to 40 people, like a ridiculous number, to the point that buildings were collapsing, catching on fire, all these people were dying. So there was all these issues, and he was actually when you look at his actual policies, was more of a reformer than a radical or a tyrant. But when it comes to what you see out in the history books and what we see today, it's all based on essentially one guy's account, who was, to say a bit biased would be a bit of an understatement. and they all the secondary historians who reference and write about it really solely only kind of touch on Seneca.
Interesting. I love this take. Julius Caesar was really a reformer, not a tyrant. And he was looking out for the people, and his haters put a smear campaign out on him. And now history sees him in, I guess, history does seem as great, like, you know, Julius Caesar, all those kind of things. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Now when I watch that show on Netflix, I'm gonna be like, oh, let's see if it lines up with what a Canada lines up with. It's gonna be very interesting stuff.
You know what? You watch the TV show, and then I'll give you a book about it, and you can have a read.
There's a few books you need to give me. I want to also actually read up on some of these autobiographies you've been reading with the previous prime ministers, and yeah, definitely the one on Julius Caesar. Knowledge is power, man. You have to keep expanding your education. In that case, then, Jordan, we're coming to an end now, so I want to give you an opportunity just to plug yourself. Where can the people find you, and what are you involved with right now that you think they'll be interested in, they can learn more about you and what you're doing?
So you can find me just via search engine. Go type in Jordan Hedi, spelled Hedi, Productions. You can find it super easy. Go to the blog there. You'll see both, because what I do is I list my written posts and my videos, my YouTube videos there. So you can get both streams of content. But if you're just like lazy and quick, you can just go onto YouTube and type in Jordan Hedi Productions. You'll find my channel there. And, you know, we cover, well, me, I shouldn't say really we, it's just me, myself and I, we cover all sorts of topics relating from relationship dynamics and how to be socially aware in those situations, to meditative practices, to things about consciousness and mindfulness. And I kind of strew across all sorts of different spectrums. I try and be as entertaining in my writing and in my videos as possible, which I think hopefully comes across. Whether or not it does, we'll never know. But, you know, if you want to have a look and you're interested in that kind of stuff, come on down.
Come on down, people. You've heard from Jordan himself. Well, once again, Jordan, I really appreciate you coming through. And I'm sure we're going to be doing this again really soon, because there's even many areas we didn't tap into because
I know, jeez.
I got to run off. I have another meeting now, unfortunately.
You said the word Bio-Statistician, but we didn't even use it.
Yeah, we didn't even use it. What we did dive into was politics, self-development, and Julius Caesar. So, you know, a bit of misdirection. You know, we're going to subvert the expectations like Game of Thrones.
That's it.
You think it's going to be good? Nah, it's terrible. I'm joking. All right, guys, remember, if you want to change your life, change the lives of those around you, this is the 100X Dudes podcast. Thanks for listening. Take care, guys.
Bye.